Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started and hopefully keep everybody on schedule. My script says that I'm Tom Barrett, but that is not true. I am not Tom Barrett. But Tom just flew in from Hawaii and his arms are really tired, to use that old joke. So I'm going to stand in for him today. We're so pleased to have everybody here for this program, Reporting Alaska, panel discussion. And we want to welcome everyone in the room, as well as our guests that are online with us today. So first, let me do a land acknowledgement. Our program, of course, originating from Anchorage, which is the traditional homeland of the Dena'ina Athabascan. We acknowledge that Alaska is the traditional homeland of 228 Alaska Native tribes. And we give thanks for the diversity, resilience, and generosity of Alaska's Indigenous people. We're also very grateful today to have the assistance of Carol Anderson. If you've joined us in the recent past, you know that Carol is very generous with her time and volunteers with us and helps check you all in and accept your payments at the front desk. So please join me in thanking Carol Anderson. And of course, we have many sponsors that help make our programs possible throughout the year. And that includes Alaska Communications, Alaska Airlines. I'm going to forget all of them right now. North Rim Bank, the Institute of Social and Economic Research, and GCI, as well as ConocoPhillips. And so we thank those sponsors, as well as others who join us throughout the year for special sponsorship opportunities. We also acknowledge our Commonwealth North members who help underwrite and support our operations. We thank our members, many of whom are with us here today. The volume for me, please. Okay, I don't see any volunteers, but I know we do have one of our board members, Ryan Binkley, is online with us. And so we welcome all of our online guests as well. And we will have some challenges with the microphone. We have two sort of concurrent systems going on, one for online and one in the room. And it sounds like the one in the room isn't working quite as well as we'd like it to. But at any rate, let me introduce our program for today. You know, our country's founders recognized that the role of media as being so important for our democratic republic and for civil society, that it is the only private institution that is enshrined in our Constitution. However, there's a lot of distance between the late 18th century and today. In its report, The Status of Local News 2022, and let me just share a slide really. Sorry, a little awkward there. In its report, The Status of Local News 2022, the Local News Initiative at Northwestern University found, and this is a quote from their report, the loss of local journalism has been accompanied by the malignant spread of misinformation and disinformation, political polarization, eroding trust in media, and a yawning digital and economic divide among citizens. In communities without a credible source of local news, voter participation declines, corruption in both government and business increases, and local residents end up paying more in taxes and at checkout. And the report goes on to say and to conclude that these circumstances constitute a crisis for our democracy and our society. Here in Alaska, we've seen media outlets go out of business, merge with their larger competitors. We've seen new media organizations arise. As businesses, our media outlets face all the vexing challenges of our times, such as finding and retaining workers, finding an effective business model, and finding and retaining a customer base. So today we're going to explore the status and the role of media in Alaska, its challenges in covering our far-flung state, as well as its role in helping Alaskans understand the most important issues confronting us. So we've invited a panel of luminaries from the Fourth Estate, as you've heard during the introductions today, to discuss the status of local media. Their faces, voices, and the content that they produce are probably familiar to all of us. So I'm just only going to briefly review their names and their roles again. So we have Rachel Kallander, who's the publisher of the Cordova Times and a serial entrepreneur that has got her hands in lots of other things. Andrew Kitchenman is the editor-in-chief of the Alaska Beacon. Julia O'Malley is a publisher, teacher, editor, and most importantly, a cook. Larry Persily is the publisher of the Wrangell Sentinel and the Oil and Gas News Briefs. And Lori Townsend is the news director for Alaska Public Media and the host of Talk Alaska. So joining our panelists is Rosey Robards. As she mentioned during her introductions, she's the director of the Alaska Teen Media Institute and executive director for the Press Club. And the Teen Media Institute, I wasn't familiar with, I'm not sure if you all are, but it's a Spirit of Youth program that's dedicated to creating and promoting and recognizing youth involvement in Alaska. And the Institute provides a variety of services, including helping young people gain media skills, creating content across all forms of media, and promoting news literacy. So please join me in welcoming our panel as I invite them up to the seats here, and we will get started, and I will turn the microphone over to Rosey.
My feet are not going to touch there.
Well, you can sit up front.
Okay.
Yeah. Matter of fact, Lori and Julia, if you want to sit up front. Tall people in back. And okay.
Here we are, Lori. Okay. Double the other dollar. Okay. Do what we get another day, another salad. Okay, hello. I think we're doing well now. Thanks everyone for being here, and thanks to our panelists. And thanks for that introduction, Juanetta. First, let's start off. I'd love to hear a little bit more about why you are all in this field. Why do you get up in the morning and do your work in journalism? Andrew, would you be able to start and just give us a brief idea of where your heart is?
So I really enjoy doing something where you see the fruit of your labor every day, you know, producing something that at least some people care about, that I think you know, you can share with others. I think that once I became a journalist, like that was really what drew me into journalism. And once I became a journalist, like understanding the role that journalism plays in democracy can be inspiring. You know, I care about the state and the community, and I really enjoy being part of a field that is aims to serve the public interest.
So just again, I'm going to explain this. We have two channels of communication going. One is for the people online and one is for people in the room. So we're going to ask the panelists to speak up for the people in the room.
Oh, so this is the online.
So this is the online is what the mic.
Andrew, I think you can pass the mic to.
So my response to this is a little bit different because I'm not a journalist and I've never been one, actually. I know everyone else here is, but I'll just answer the journalism focused questions from my own hot seat, I guess. The reason I think that I'm now involved in media for the past 9 months as publisher of the Cordova Times is because the paper was threatened with going under effectively. The previous owners were not interested or able to maintain it. And there was sort of a community hunt for a solution. And I was born and raised in Cordova. The Cordova Times has existed in Cordova and been in print consistently for 108 years. And I think that my stake in that storyline and not seeing it run out in 2022, which would have been the case, really came from and I guess you asked us to share like our personal side. So really came from my identity as a commercial fisherman's daughter in Cordova. The Exxon Valdez oil spill, actually the 34th anniversary is day after tomorrow of the spill. And many people on this panel covered that spill, and many people in this room remember it, splashed across news stations here and across the country. And I guess that my passion point that tipped me over to taking on the newspaper was a memory of how our community rallied together and how our local media supported that rallying cry and helped people organize. The oil spill was a pivotal piece in our identity and history, whether we liked it or not. We were studied for decades. My generation was actually called in many research papers, quote, the children of the spill. And it's the reason why so many things in my life happened. It's the reason I went to work in Congress, which is how I fell in love with what the media can provide to people in terms of information and awareness. It's the reason I pursued a law degree. So I think a major event, the way that it's covered and the way that local media can show up for a community and help a community through an event with fact-based, organized reporting is a powerful tool. And I know we're going to talk more about how that tool is going or trends in that tool as local media goes around the country later in the panel. But yep, that's my sort of personal story in this.
I guess it's pretty simple. I like being nosy. Great job. I'm a child of the 60s and I haven't given up yet that I can make the world a better place. So that's part of it too. And honestly, as a freshman in college, English was the only class I passed. So I thought, well, passed. That's the only one. Calculus and organic chemistry were not me. So it seemed like, and I'm curious. And I guess I'd like sharing that curiosity with everyone else, or at least offering it to them and hoping they read it.
Thanks, Larry. Julia?
So the other week or so, I guess I did a search to figure out when I had first published a story in the Anchorage Daily News, and it was 27 years ago, which is shocking. And, you know, when I first started doing journalism, I really felt like I had something to say, and I was observing a world that I wanted other people to see. And I think as time has gone on, I really see journalism as a service to community, and one that I feel really strongly about. You know, I've thought and considered working other places, including in big cities, and consider jobs out there, but I don't feel like it really gives me what I want, which is this thing of like being able to reflect and look out for and document this place. I find Anchorage in particular to be this kind of ever unfolding, interesting story. And I see journalism as a way to connect history to the future, to document what's going on now so that we can look back on it. And more, I really like helping young journalists to engage that process. And I like to think strategically about news coverage. So I guess it's really changed for me into sort of a love affair with place and community, because I think that this place is important. I think we have things to share with the wider world, but I also think at this moment, because we have been divided by many things and isolated socially, journalism has this real mission to just reflect our place that we share and our culture that we share back, so that we can kind of remember who we are and what this place is about. So anyway, I guess that would sum it up. Yeah. Oh.
Well, I'm a little bit in Larry's camp because I was very nosy as a kid, and my sister was constantly telling our mom to keep me out of her stuff. But I really wanted to go into journalism as a young person because I really believed in helping people both get the information that they needed to make good decisions for themselves, their families, their communities, but also to help people that don't have power have a voice, because I think that is one of the most important things we do. All right. dual service. I'm in stereo now. And I think it's really important, as the kid of a handicapped dad, I learned early on about injustices in the world, how people look at someone and make assumptions about them just based on the way they look. And so that started me on a path of wanting people to build better understanding and respect between each other. And I think it's important for us to hold power accountable and help people get what they need so that they can make those choices. What gets me up every day is hearing voices, the voices in my head that have been there for the 30 years I've been a reporter. Some of them, the voices that say, thank you so much. That story helped me realize I'm not alone and I could make a decision to change my life and get out of a bad situation. Or, the voices that say, why aren't you guys doing this? I welcome them all because we need to hear from everyone. And that's what I love about democracy. It's noisy and messy, but all those voices matter. And when people are challenging us, that's great because we might have missed something and we should know that. And so every day I feel honored that we get to do this work.
Thank you all. You can keep those, Lori. Yeah, I think so. Okay. So now it's time for our speed round. Each of the panelists has a paddle, and I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and we'll see how you all respond yes or no. The first one is, do Alaskans trust the media? And then our next question is, do Alaskans trust local news? We have
Can we have ranked choice voting?
so we all hear about what is defined as like news deserts, where we don't have local reporters, areas of land where there just aren't people on the ground to cover the issues that are happening. Do we have news deserts here in Alaska? Do you have concerns that people don't understand the difference between fact and opinion? Is adequately covering Alaska more difficult now than it was 5 or even 10 years ago? Thank you all. So now we're going to go a little bit more in depth into some more questions for these panelists. I'd like to talk briefly about the state of local journalism. Maybe we could start with either Larry or Rachel, as you have put a lot of your time and energy and money into hyper-local journalism. Would one of you be willing to start just giving us a little update about what you see as the state of journalism right now? Local journalism, please.
Well, as a publisher who has not been a journalist before, I think I'll try to channel the 3 journalists at the Cordova Times and what they might say. So I think reporting is hard. You're never going to please everyone, and I don't meddle in what our reporters do and do not say or what they cover actually. So I'm trying to answer this the best that I can. Maybe I'll just share a story. Last week, a very unfortunate incident occurred in Cordova late at night on the weekend. Actually, it was just this past weekend. I think it was Saturday night. A person was arrested and detained in jail. And I've been in that jail, not myself, not locked up, but I've seen it. And there's, I believe, 2 jail cells. So like if you've seen it and you know how small those rooms and PDs are in small towns like Cordova, you know how stressful this must have been for them. Somehow or another, the young person was detained and then at some point assaulted an officer and actually escaped the police department. I'm channeling Amanda Williams, who's our full-time reporter locally on the ground in Cordova. She basically saw the alert and has a first name and text message relationship with the police department, and got right down there, started driving around town. This is a really small town, right? But this is a massive event for a small town. And she has worked really hard to build a relationship of trust with the police department. And so I guess I just segued away from, you asked about the state of local journalism. I think that looks completely different in Anchorage. It looks completely different in Fairbanks. And I know Larry has a lot to share with all of his experience, but I think in a small town, what I've heard, at least from our reporters, is that they're working really hard to build inroads and trust. And where there are opportunities to rebuild trust, they're seeking that out. And I think that's amazing, and that's a really good path for the future, especially for small weekly papers. Yes.
Well, I think there's two parts to that question. One is the economics are really challenging. I mean, the economics stink, right? I know of several small weeklies in the state that are losing money. The advertising base isn't there anymore, not just classified ads, public notices, retail advertising. You almost at a point with some of these small weeklies, you just need a benefactor who's going to cover it, and actually small dailies too. So that makes it tough. You can't afford enough staff. You can't pay them enough. I don't know anybody who has health insurance. So that's a challenge as young reporters rotate in and out, don't develop contacts, knowledge, sources. But I think the other problem in local journalism is people, when I started this 50 some years ago, it was people were more talkative then. People now are suspicious. What do you want to know? Why do you want to know it? I'll get back to you. You email the questions. I refuse to I object when reporters want to conduct email interviews. You don't get to know the person, and you don't know who's writing the damn answers anyhow. So I think the reluctance in small towns, people are suspicious. They like local news, but they're scared about Facebook and national media. So you got to win the trust so they'll talk to you. It's gotten harder. It really is. They see it on Facebook, and then that kind of ruins it, because you're trying to overcome the damage that's already been done by someone who is a blogger or a journalist, or just had something stupid to say and click the buttons online.
Thank you both. Do any of our other panelists have anything they'd like to add about the state of local journalism before we move on?
I'll just say that my two main thoughts is that in comparing local journalism in Alaska to the past, you would have a lot of concerns. If you're comparing it to the rest of the country, it is stronger here than in most of the rest of the country. The kind of communities that have struggling small papers here, they don't have papers in the rest of the country. And public media and public radio is an enormous strength to journalism in Alaska that doesn't exist in the same way in the rest of the country. So, but which is not to minimize any of the problems that are happening right now. And then, I'll just leave it at that.
I want to agree with Andrew and also with comments that Larry made about how hard it is for small towns, especially not only the financial side, but keeping someone in place. I was thinking about one of the stations in our network, and I was talking to one of the GMs who said their reporter has said they're leaving because they've talked to everybody in the town at least once, and a bunch of people won't talk to them anymore. And so they just don't think there's anything left for them to do there, which is crushing because that's not the answer. You don't run away. And so, one of the things I didn't say is in our introduction is that, Dwayne Heyman mentioned the Alaska Center for Excellence in Journalism, and we have this board. There's members of the board that are in this room, and part of the mission there is to help support and grow journalism across the state, and to help news organizations in South Central and to keep building for the future so that those newsrooms can stay robust and keep those reporters in place in small towns. And so we're looking at a lot of different ways of supporting that, and maybe there'll be time to talk about it, but it's so critical to have those newsrooms continue on, as we saw in that report. The erosion of or the loss of local news results in an erosion of trust and the potential for corruption to rise. And so having a local newsroom and hyper local news is critical for democracy.
Okay, Lori, we can continue with you. As someone who works with staff of reporters across the state, really, I wonder what you might have thoughts on Alaska's vast geography and how that makes things more challenging for local news. Maybe we have more news deserts here in Alaska than other places.
Yeah, it's very challenging because, as people who have traveled in rural Alaska know, it's really expensive to get to places. And so we have absolutely news deserts. And then the problem is that when you do say, let's plan to do some reporting in this region, then you need to work and build that trust, because you can't just parachute in. That's what happens far too often, is something happens and reporters will jump in there for 2 or 3 days. And folks that are working in the state's newsrooms will often get it closer to right than people who come in from outside. And, depending on how big the event is, that sometimes happens. But we have to really plan in advance for how can we afford to make these trips to cover these things in the way that they should be covered, not just you're jumping in the morning and leaving by the afternoon. It takes time. And so that's really expensive. And it's hard to justify at times how you're going to meet that cost. And then when I think about, there's a lot of information out there about the broadband connection being better in rural Alaska, but I think it's still going to be a very long time before a lot of those communities will have internet access that is both fast enough for what they need, but also affordable so that they can get news and information that way. So there are definitely news deserts in Alaska, and probably will be for a while. Although the public broadcasting system is one area that, we have the potential to reach pretty much 100% of the state through our statewide system. And so we are better off in that respect than many other states, as Andrew mentioned, because those stations are in those communities. We're not just broadcasting from Anchorage. Those stories are originating in those places with their reporters. So there's a higher level of trust.
Okay. Yeah, Julia?
One of the things about news deserts that the press club's been trying to tackle is really working on the pipeline of reporters who work in the state. We're hiring lots and lots of reporters from out of state and very few from in-state. And part of that has to do with the type of reporters that are coming out of our university journalism programs, both of which have been significantly diminished over time. And also, some of it also has to do with the quality of the jobs that are available in journalism. The people that are coming to do those jobs from outside often don't have the same college debt. They're looking at it like you might look at going in the Peace Corps or being an AmeriCorps member or that kind of thing. And that's cool, but what would be better is to have a journalist with roots in the community, a young journalist with roots in the community who really wants to tell the story of the place and understands it and already has a set of sources available. So one of the problems when we're trying to recruit people to work in small communities is just having people with the skills in those places. So that's something that we're trying to, work on, but also the quality of journalism jobs has not kept up. So, we don't have retirement. The retirement system is, maybe there's a 401k. No one's getting a matched 401k. That's ancient. And certainly no one's getting a pension. That happened back in the olden days. And then if health insurance is available, the deductibles are really high. And so a job in the public relations sector, which is where most of the journalism graduates are going, has better benefits and pays more. So you know, we have a lot of challenges in that regard to kind of figure out. But all of that contributes to a lack of smart, grounded local reporting. So I just wanted to put that up. Anybody else?
And if anyone else would like to weigh in, you could, but we could move on to Andrew. Do you? Okay, thank you.
I'll just quickly note that Matt Nuskas is in a borough I would define in many ways as a news desert, and I think it's that way for complicated reasons, and it's no disrespect to the few journalists who are covering it, but it's you know, more than 1/7 of the state's population, and you know, has maybe a couple journalists. If there's in the ballpark of 100 journalists in the state, then maybe 2 or 3% of those work in that. Oh, and Utqiagvik is the other, I think, strong. Julia just mentioned Utqiagvik, the other really strong example. So, I mean, it's interesting because I think a small community that still has a news organization presence is in a much better position than a small community anywhere else in the United States. So, on the other hand, there are communities that have never really had much of a news presence in Alaska, and you know, those communities are absolutely news deserts. Yeah, I guess that just observation of where it is.
Well, Mike moment. I pulled a few stats. I love stats for this. I was just interested before this conversation. And, you know, there are really dire stats. So the rate that newspapers are closing nationwide has remained the same since before the pandemic, which is, according to this report by Northwestern, which I think is the one you cited earlier, is about 2 newspapers per week. And then we know there's a lot about, like you asked us earlier as well, you know, do people struggle with opinion versus fact and misinformation? We've seen this huge surge in that trend in our country, which is, again, why local media is so critical. But I did want to just share to a point that Larry made about, you know, some people really don't want to talk to reporters anymore. And I'm sure that that's true. I just wanted to anecdotally offer up that I just had a conversation with the Cordova Times editor a few days ago, and she used to work for the Clarion, and she said, I'm fascinated by the numbers of tips and requests for, can you come interview us on this? And just the amount of emails that are coming in to that newsroom inbox. And so I do think, I'm just going to throw it out there, that I think if we're talking about Alaska and we're talking about weeklies and small towns, it could be suggested that every small town is very unique in their relationship with that local paper and the media. And I think that a lot goes into that, right? Like the politics of the town, the demographics of the town. Is it more conservative? Is it more liberal? What's the relationship with that paper been like? Did it ever go out of business? Did it come back into business? How much turnover has there been there with reporters? Did somebody really burn the community and then they rehired and they've had to completely rebuild that trust? So I think all of that has really been thanks in large part to the previous owners of the Cordova Times. All that's been more or less on our side. But I do think that, you know, it was striking to me what you shared, that I think there's major differences, obviously. And I look forward to learning more about those as I maybe complete my first year in this role in a couple of months here.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay. Well, we all know that the internet has changed things for journalism, and it's made it exponentially easier for government entities, businesses, and other organizations to communicate directly with members of the public. If, say, the police department can update everyone via Nixle and their social media, why do we as a society need journalists? Julia, would you be willing to start with this one?
Sorry. Well, I always ask the question in my journalism classes that I've taught, like who benefits when there's fewer reporters? Who benefits when there isn't coverage of something? And it's, you know, and there are lots of people who benefit when nobody's paying attention, as everyone knows, especially, but when those people are working on the public dime in particular, if nobody's paying attention, things can kind of go off the rails, and journalism plays a role in a small community of just keeping an eye on that. So when you allow, for example, APD to provide the only narrative of what happened at a very serious event, and there is no corroboration, we have seen many times that maybe our law enforcement is not the most accurate source as we look across the country and multiple lawsuits going on, all high profile lawsuits going on all over the place where we find out that the law enforcement narrative is not complete. We know that there has got to be some kind of publicly interested watchdog there because we're looking out for how the public money is spent and whether people are being treated fairly. Right. But what has happened, it used to be back in the olden times, we could hear every police call coming through, and we knew, the scanner was on, it was public information, there'd been lawsuits about it. Now none of that's available. So even reporters themselves, in order to know what's happening, they're reliant on law enforcement telling its own story. But there are certain situations in which it doesn't really benefit them to tell the story or tell an accurate story. And so that system has really gotten far less accountable over time. So that would be like, one example. The other thing would be, a politician just speaking directly. This started with Sarah Palin. She pioneered it. She was a really smart politician in a lot of ways, and in just like thinking about the way she was able to reach certain receptive audiences directly. And that's the point of organizations and politicians using social media to deliver a message and circumventing media. But when a politician makes an announcement about something, just on social media, it only reaches a curated audience. And so it doesn't reach the whole public. So that's another reason that reporters are important, is because, if you just put it on Twitter or Facebook, you don't reach everybody out there. You only reach the people who are in that circle. And sometimes a politician, that benefits them. They want a smaller audience or a more receptive audience for an announcement. So that's another reason that, this sort of direct communication with audiences does not serve the public, and journalism has a role there. But journalists can't keep up, and the ability to hold public institutions accountable has been really eroded, even in my kind of short time. There's just not enough of a way to know what's going on and verify it. Another piece of that is that the ability for news organizations to sue for public records has been eroded over time. There just isn't the capacity that there once was. So that kind of like weapon in the closet that used to compel public organizations to make public information available, that doesn't really exist. So anyway, that's a little depressing, but
Yeah. I just want to pick up there that there's no context. If you just get this announcement, you don't really know what is the full picture of what's happening. And police departments are comprised of human beings, just like all the rest of us. And some of them have some people might have a certain set of beliefs that's how they approach their job, or they're having a bad day, or they make a mistake. And the public should know about how these actions come about, how they're decided, how they're dealt with if there was a mistake made. And then it also helps us figure out over time, what's happening with certain types of crime or certain areas where there are concentrations. And maybe we need to do more in-depth reporting about why is that? Why is this area always experiencing this many shootings or this much robbery? And so I think it's always important for there to be, and as Julia said, there's been, the police cam videos that we've seen just some horrific things. And the public needs to have some stepped back context without emotion attached to it that can help them understand how these problems arise and what some of the resolves could be in the future to help improve things.
I just, I wanted to sort of reject the premise because while it may be easier to put something on the internet, I wouldn't define that as communication. So if something is on the internet, it might be a lot easier from a town manager point of view, but when it was a public notice that landed in your mailbox or driveway, it actually was reaching you. So, and then secondly, I like to talk about the independence of journalism, that when journalism is being done well, the only interest it's serving should be the broad community interest, and it's not tied to any other interest, including those that purport to serve the public interest. So, journalists at their best are using their judgment in a way that's really unique in a community.
I had two points and a quote to share. My 2 points would be from my perspective, I guess personally and professionally. More journalists, yes, please. More information available to the public, yes, very important. And this might be, diametrically opposed to my role as a publisher, but throughout my 20s, cutting my teeth professionally was on political campaigns in Alaska. And there was something that was always very wisely said and put to new staffers and interns on all of these campaigns. And it was said by different ways, by different managers and myself, but I think it's a credit to our media in Alaska. And Sarah's worked a lot of campaigns, and so I know she's going to nod her head. And that is, you say to these new young fresh faces, never say, do, or write anything you don't want on the front page of the Anchorage Daily News. And I say that with a very stern face, whether you're an intern or you're seasoned. And that's really a nod to the journalists, and hopefully more journalists in Alaska who are poking around. Like Larry and Lori said, they grew up nosy and they're still nosy, and that's part of why they love the job. I think that levels up the accountability and also really the threat point for any bad actors. And so I think that helps also young people who need to remember when you walk out the door or you walk into your office, you need to remember who you are and who you represent. And I think that the media plays a huge role in that.
Oh, just the one.
I think the answer is obvious. Yes, government or private businesses put out press releases, announcements, but they're only self-serving. It's just the one side. I can think, well, for example, this whole controversy that has erupted over legislative salary increases. The governor fired the entire board, which met without reading an agenda on 48 hours notice. No one would have known this was engineered if the press hadn't reported it. There was no announcement. Oh, we're going to have a meeting after we fire everyone for this predetermined, pre-written. We got this all figured out and it's going to go through and we're all going to get a 67% raise. If the press didn't report it, no one was going to announce it. Other cases, I can think of a small town in Alaska. They fired the borough manager and paid probably close to $100,000 just to buy the person off. They never announced that. They just said, oh, she left for personal reasons. Yeah, six-figure personal reasons. Another small town, if you were to ask them, gee, what were your sales tax receipts for last year? Well, now that you ask, we can't tell you because the account's so messed up, we don't know. So there is a purpose to journalism. It's just getting the public back to trusting it and listening, reading, watching it.
Juanetta, how are we doing on time? Should we tie up with the last question?
One more round and then we'll ask for a few audience questions, but go ahead.
Okay. All right. I'll go ahead and combine my last two questions. Hopefully that isn't too much. But could you all talk a little bit about what local journalism needs and what you'd like to see the media landscape looking like?
I'll start. What local journalism needs is all of you. It's a partnership between news organizations and the community. We need you to tell us things. We need you to buy subscriptions to newspapers and, memberships in your local broadcast outlets. It really is a partnership that depends on the community to keep it thriving. The community needs to be able to, as Larry said, they've got to trust. And that takes relationship building and that's, something that we spend a lot of time doing. But I think we also need to, as Julia said, we need to get reporters into places and keep them there. When I first came to Alaska 23 years ago or more and joined newsrooms here, there were a lot of people that had a lot of long tenure in the state as reporters. And so that was very helpful for me as someone, I wasn't that young, but still, it was helpful that I could turn to my colleagues and say, what's the backstory on this? And who should I talk to about who, can help fill out the details here? That's lacking now because there's not as many seasoned journalists in the state in newsrooms as there once was. And we see a lot of churn, people that have been here for less than 5 years. And so keeping people in place helps build that trust and helps develop those relationships so that you have that longer context and can really drill down on stories and get to the point where we're investigating things and not just hitting the high spots and reporting on what's coming across. So supporting newsrooms so that they can keep that, build that longevity is really critical for the future.
We need innovation in our business model. It's just absolutely essential that we find and keep audiences online, that we create content that finds an audience, that we are useful, but we still have to explore ways in which we can fund journalism that are different than we've done it before. And that might include and has been including partnerships, includes nonprofit journalism, but we need support for innovation so that we can provide more support for our newsrooms so that we can grow them. When there are more journalists in the community, there's more journalism. When there's more journalism, there's more trust. So I think it all comes down to the dollars and cents part of how we make these organizations robust and sustainable.
So 9 months into my role with the Cordova Times, I can say I spent a lot of time thinking about and learning about the business model of small newspapers. I own or I have a nonprofit that I founded and run, and then I have a small business here in Anchorage. So between the two of those, I've thought a lot about governance and structure so that you can pay the bills and keep a team and keep rolling down the road. One thing I did was I announced to my community, whom I love, listen, this is a community effort. Once this happens, this transition happens, it's going to take the whole community. And you know what? Cordova showed up. They really showed up. We didn't lose a single advertiser. And if anything, I feel like they showed up with a gumption. It was a call to action. And I love them for that. And I'm thankful to them for that. And that's continued. And we're working really hard at the Times to make sure that we maintain that sort of faith in us and that they do continue that. The other thing that I will say as a new kid on the block with this is I think that there hasn't been, and I'm not sure, I'd love to sidebar with each one of these panelists about this to learn more. But I want to shout out Ryan Binkley, who I can see is still on the Zoom, and the publisher at the Anchorage Daily News. I called Ryan when I decided to take on the Times, and I said, I need help, like a lot of help. I don't know anything about this industry. I know enough about keeping a small business alive, but I'm going to need a lot of guidance. And you know what Ryan did? The publisher of the largest newspaper in this state, he dispatched on one email all of his top team leaders and said, help Rachel, please. She's trying to save a small newspaper that's existed for over 100 years. And that's exactly what they did. They offered a free Zoom call to me at any point. One of sort of his co-publishers for weeks on end in the first 2 months Zoomed with me every single week, just a free hour of his time and bandwidth as a busy person. So I think it's clear to me that this industry shows up for one another. In my limited time and experience in this space, that's a beautiful thing to see. But I do think innovating the business model so that small weeklies can recruit some of the benefits that the bigger newspapers have. And I've talked with Ryan and others at the ADN on this, like sponsored content and some of these other revenue streams that the big papers historically have, but the small papers historically, from my understanding, don't participate in. And so I think innovating that to keep these things alive, there's nothing wrong with that. They have to be competitive. And so I think Alaskans will show up for one another. They always do. And that's my hope.
I'm with Julie on this. I think in addition to, yes, we need people to buy ads and subscribers, but there aren't enough ads out there. There's not enough subscribers. We've got to figure out as an industry what works as a business model. What do people want to read? How to get it to them? It's going to be a blend of what we think you should read, but it's got to be enough of what you want to read. So you pick up the paper or look at the website. And if not, it just becomes a hobby. There's no point me writing a check because I think you should read these 17 stories this week if no one reads the 17 stories. So we've got to figure out what's going to catch and keep readers, listeners engaged. And that's our responsibility, not the community's.
So for what journalism needs, it would benefit from more experienced journalists, which means higher paid. And unfortunately, I think to the degree to which what I said earlier was true, that the journalism is stronger here than in the rest of the country, I think to some degree it's underpinned by really inadequate pay. And I don't have any answers. As far as the business model, working for a nonprofit, I do believe that nonprofit journalism has a strong future. Obviously, that depends on the support that members of the public provide for it. And I'd like to see, while, as one has said at the beginning, it's a private institution that's in the Constitution. It's always been primarily a private industry. Something like public notices was always a really direct subsidy. And I think there may be a role for some sort of equivalent of that in the future. I mean, I'm a journalist and it's not really my position to have a position on that. It's just an observation that there was public subsidy. And then as far as where we are in the future, I just would say that Alaska journalism's fate isn't going to be unchained from the fate of Alaska's economy. And so that's one thing that will absolutely be shaping where Alaska journalism is in 5 years.
Yes. Okay, yeah, I think we're ready for some of the audience questions.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm just going to do 2 quick questions and ask you for short answers. For everybody, what's your opinion? I know Ryan's going to still online. What's your opinion of the new ABC TV show called Alaska Daily? Is it how accurate do you think it portrays Alaska newspapers and reporters?
I watched one episode, the first one with a bunch of college friends. We get all journalists. We all thought it was shallow, superficial. We just didn't like it. It was TV, right? They solved the problems of everything in 51 minutes. I didn't care for it. So I haven't watched it again.
My answer is that I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, in addition to having a very busy work life and a large, 3 teams to manage. So I have not watched it. My TV bandwidth is extremely limited, but I do look forward to trying to watch it. I've heard a lot of mixed reviews.
There's a cliche that familiarity breeds contempt. And I feel like it does a pretty good job of capturing a lot of things in journalism that most media about reporters don't get at. And its weaknesses are structural to all of dramatic network television. So yeah, I mean, I love to see some of the things about Anchorage, and I'm generally impressed, but I will say that I've had, as you could guess, a lot of Alaska journalists have had conversations about the show since it started, and I would say I'm in a minority. Like, I like it more than most.
I am proud of the fact that we have journalists and writers in the state who participated in the show, and I think they have made the show better. How's that?
Well, I have had a lot of conversations with journalists about the show, but I've never seen it myself. So I can't have an opinion on it because I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot of chatter about it, both some appreciating certain aspects of it and some expressing some of what Larry expressed.
I'm gonna go this way. Well, so the answer is, I love the Easter eggs for all of us Alaskans in there. It's fun to see every week, I think. And I'm really just delighted about the national coverage for missing, murdered, and Indigenous women. So I think if nothing else, notwithstanding the weaknesses of having to deliver a dramatic portrayal of something in a limited time frame, I hope it's doing some good. So one final question is, what support do you think we need for more and better investigative reporting in Alaska?
Financial and personnel. You need the money and you need the people who have the skills, the knowledge, the expertise to do it. So yeah, find the money and then we can find the people.
I don't really have an answer. I defer to all these experts.
I would just emphasize that there are a lot of things that news organizations have covered in a lot of different ways, and investigative journalism is vital, but news organizations have to weigh all the other things. And so I would hate to see, the only thing that's left of journalism to be investigative journalism. People need to know who their local elected officials are. They need to know what policies their local governing bodies are considering and what the legislature is considering. And so in no way would I say anything negative about funding investigative journalism, but it's merely one of the things, one of the types of journalism that needs to be funded. And I guess that's my.
And this just goes back into the pipeline issue, but we have to be able to hold on to journalists into the middle of their careers. And that means that we have to have pay, benefits, jobs that are structured for people who are parents. And journalism has not kept up. We're not able to hold on to mid-career journalists. We have a hard time with that. And it was not always the case, but because of the way that newsrooms have been diminished, because we can't offer senior reporting positions that often, we lose the reporters who have roots, deep sources, and good, lots and lots of practice, who are able to perform, to do these investigative projects. So even if you've got like a ton of funding, if you don't have journalists who've worked here for a while, who know how things work, you can't do projects. So we have to be able to hold on to the journalists that we have.
Yeah, I agree with everything that everyone has said here. It comes down to money and experience. You need reporters that have that level of experience that can do the work, but then also taking people out of that daily rotation, because if you have a daily newspaper or broadcast news, you got to fill the maw every day. So it has to be that mix, as Andrew was saying, of the things that people need to know on a consistent basis. And then you have to be able to have enough people in your newsroom that you can say, okay, we're going to take this person out of rotation for 3 weeks or maybe 3 months, and they're just going to focus on this thing. That's incredibly expensive and difficult for a newsroom to allocate that sort of time. And then in this day and age where there's so much, the threat of lawsuit and litigation is so prevalent, that you have to make sure you've got services that can help that journalist through legal review and multiple edits. We've done some of those investigative projects where it takes a whole team. It's not just a reporter and an editor. It's a lot more, going to do the research, finding those documents, and then having somebody look over it from a legal viewpoint to make sure you're not going to get sued out of existence. So it's difficult to have both the level of experience that's necessary, the expertise, and the funding to do this work. But it's also very important work, as we know, what we see comes out of investigations when we can do them.
Great. Well, please join me in thanking our panel, Rosie, Andrew, Rachel, Larry, Julia, and Lori. And we appreciate your insights and the observations that you've shared. And we think this is a very important topic to keep citizens engaged and aware of what's going on in our communities and in our state. So we thank you for your time and for illuminating some of those issues for us. I'm going to just give an abbreviated sign up since we are running a little bit long, but thank you all for joining. Thanks to everybody online who's joined us today. Our next session is next Friday. Representative Ben Carpenter, who is the chairman for the House Ways and Means Committee, will address the Fiscal Policy Study Group, and he'll be talking about some of the revenue measures that the Ways and Means Committee is considering. So please look at commonwealthnorth.org or check your email. I'll love to send you reminders, and please join us for a future session. Thanks so much.